The rain hit like a wall. Marcus felt it before he saw it, that pressure drop in the air, the way the temperature fell 10 degrees in 30 seconds, the smell of wet asphalt rising off the highway like something ancient waking up. He'd been riding since noon. 8 hours on the road, 300 miles behind him, and another 300 still ahead. His Harley was running rough, had been since Missouri, and the GPS had gone dark somewhere outside of Tulsa when his phone battery finally surrendered to the cold. He was riding on memory and instinct now, the way old riders do, reading the road by feel instead of by screen. Then the sky opened up. Not a drizzle. Not a warning. A full, violent, biblical downpour that turned the highway into a river in under 60 seconds. Marcus gripped the handlebars and leaned forward, jaw tight, eyes narrowed behind his visor, water sheeting across the road so fast his tires were hydroplaning on straightaways. He could barely see 20 feet ahead. The white lines disappeared. The shoulder disappeared. Everything disappeared except rain and darkness and the deep, animal instinct that told him to get off this road right now. He spotted the gas station awning through the blur, a pale yellow glow on the right side of the highway, maybe 200 yards out. He signaled out of habit even though there was nobody behind him, eased off the throttle, and guided the Harley onto the exit ramp with both hands steady and his heart doing things it hadn't done since he was 23 years old and riding without a helmet through the Arizona desert. He pulled under the awning at 11 p.m., killed the engine, and just sat there for a moment. Soaked through every layer. Jacket, flannel, thermal underneath, all of it saturated. Water ran off the brim of his helmet in a steady stream. His boots were filled. His hands were so cold he had to think about uncurling his fingers from the grips, had to send the signal deliberately, like a man operating machinery from a distance. He pulled off his helmet and breathed. The gas station was closed. Pumps dark. Door locked. Just the awning and the pale light above it, still running on some automatic timer that had no idea a storm was happening. Marcus leaned his bike on the kickstand, stretched his back, and turned around to look at the highway. That's when he saw them. One headlight. Then two. Then 4, 6, 8, a string of motorcycles materializing out of the rain like ghosts finding their way home. They hadn't been riding together. He could tell by the spacing, by the different styles of approach, the way each rider handled the exit ramp with their own particular brand of caution. Strangers. All of them. People who had merged into the same lane somewhere on the same desperate stretch of highway when the storm turned violent, who had followed each other out of pure human instinct, because in the dark and the rain, a taillight ahead of you is the most comforting thing in the world. They pulled in one by one under the awning, killing engines, pulling off helmets, exhaling. 8 riders total, including Marcus. A woman in her 50s with silver hair and mud up to her knees. 2 younger men who looked like brothers, same jawline, same exhausted expression. A heavy-set man in a vintage Indian jacket who immediately checked his saddlebags for water damage with the focused grief of someone inspecting a wound. A quiet man in his 40s who hadn't said a word yet and wouldn't say many more all night. A couple, you could tell by the way they automatically stood close without looking at each other, the unconscious proximity of people who've logged years together. Nobody knew anybody. Nobody asked any questions. They just stood there under that awning in the rain, 8 strangers held together by weather and luck and the shared understanding that the road had made a decision for all of them tonight. There was no cell signal. Marcus checked. So did 3 other people, independently, all getting the same result and holding their phones up at the same angle the way people do, as if altitude changes anything. No hotel within walking distance. No way to call anyone. The gas station offered nothing, not even a vending machine visible through the glass. The rain wasn't letting up. If anything, it was getting worse, the kind of storm that settles in and makes itself comfortable, the kind that doesn't apologize. Marcus looked at the highway. Water was running across both lanes now in flat, fast sheets. Even if they wanted to ride, they couldn't. Not safely. Not tonight. He looked down the road in the other direction, away from the highway, into what looked like a small town that had mostly gone to sleep. Dark storefronts. A closed diner. A barber shop. And then, maybe 60 yards off the main road, down a slight gravel incline, a light. Not a bright light. A warm one. The kind that comes from inside a place where someone is actually working, that particular amber glow that only exists when a lamp is near metal and oil and old things being repaired. A garage. 2 bay doors, both closed. A single light burning in the window above them. A hand-painted sign that Marcus couldn't fully read from where he stood, but he could make out the first word. Earl's. He stood there for a moment, just looking at it. Then the light shifted. Someone moving inside. A shape crossing in front of the window. And then one of the bay doors opened, just slightly, just enough, and a man stepped out into the rain. He was older. That much Marcus could see even from 60 yards away in the dark. He moved with the particular economy of someone who has been on their feet for 50 years and learned exactly how many steps anything takes. He wore oil-stained coveralls, the kind that start dark blue and fade to something in between over decades of use. He had a rag in one hand. He stood in the rain outside his garage door and looked across the road at 8 soaked bikers standing under a gas station awning, and he looked at them for exactly as long as it took to understand the situation. Which wasn't long at all. He didn't deliberate. Didn't go back inside to think it over or make a phone call or check with anyone. He just raised one arm and waved, a slow, wide, unmistakable wave, the kind that means come here, the kind that doesn't leave room for misunderstanding, and then he turned and pulled the bay door all the way open. Marcus picked up his helmet. "You seeing what I'm seeing?" the silver-haired woman asked. "Yeah," Marcus said. They looked at each other for about half a second. Then all 8 of them started moving. They walked their bikes across the road in the rain, through the gravel, into the garage one at a time. The space smelled like motor oil and rubber and old coffee and something else underneath it all, decades of work, maybe, the specific smell of a place where a person has spent the majority of their life doing something they actually understand. Tools hung on pegboards in arrangements that had clearly never changed. A transistor radio on a shelf. A calendar from an auto parts company dated several years back, still up because nobody had thought to take it down or nobody cared to. A space heater in the corner that the old man immediately clicked on without being asked. His name was Earl. 72 years old. He'd opened this shop in 1987, the year Marcus was in the 3rd grade, and he'd run it alone for most of that time, first with his wife until she passed, then with a part-time kid who came in summers, and for the last several years alone again, the way he preferred it, the way he'd grown accustomed to it. He told them almost none of this right away. Instead he dragged folding chairs from a back room and set them up without ceremony, pulled an old coffee pot from a workbench shelf, filled it from a utility sink in the corner, and set it on the burner. He looked at 8 drenched strangers, leather jackets, road tattoos, mud-caked boots, the particular weariness of people who've been fighting weather for hours, and his expression held nothing complicated in it. No hesitation. No calculation. No performance of generosity for anyone watching, because nobody was watching. Just a man who saw people who needed to be inside and had a building they could be inside of. He said 4 words. "Y'all get in here." And that was it. That was the whole decision. 4 words and a pot of coffee and every chair he owned dragged out into the middle of a garage floor while rain hammered the bay doors and 8 strangers peeled off their soaked gloves and sat down in the warmth and felt something that none of them would have fully predicted when they woke up that morning. Safe. Completely and unexpectedly safe. Marcus wrapped both hands around a paper cup of coffee, leaned back in his folding chair, and looked around at the faces of 7 people he'd never met before tonight, all of them slowly thawing, slowly exhaling, slowly becoming themselves again after hours of the road. He looked at Earl, moving quietly between the bikes, already crouching beside one with a flashlight, already starting to look, already starting to help. Marcus didn't know it yet. But by dawn, this night was going to change everything, for all of them, but most of all for the men who'd opened the door. They stayed until 4 in the morning. Nobody planned it that way. Nobody looked at a clock and made a decision to remain. It happened the way good things sometimes happen, gradually, naturally, without anyone directing it, the way a fire builds when the wood is right and the air is right and nobody is forcing anything. 1 cup of coffee became 2. 1 conversation became several. The rain kept coming, steady and permanent against the bay doors, and the garage got warmer, and somewhere in that warmth something shifted between 8 strangers and 1 old man who had simply opened a door. Earl worked while they talked. That was the thing about him, he didn't sit down and hold court, didn't position himself at the center of the evening. He moved. He circled the bikes quietly, flashlight in hand, crouching beside each one with the focused attention of a man who has spent 50 years reading machines the way other people read faces. He didn't ask permission. He just looked, and when he saw something that needed attention, he went to his pegboard, selected exactly the right tool without hesitating, and got to work. Marcus watched him fix the first bike and didn't say anything for a moment. It was the heavy-set man's Indian, the one who'd been grieving over his saddlebags when they first arrived. Something in the carburetor. Earl diagnosed it in under 2 minutes, which was faster than any shop Marcus had ever visited with a computer diagnostic system and a clipboard. Earl worked in silence for 20 minutes while the group talked around him, and when he stood up and wiped his hands on his coveralls and said it was done, the heavy-set man reached immediately for his wallet. Earl shook his head once. Just once. Didn't make a speech about it. The men tried again. Earl had already moved to the next bike. That gesture, quiet, complete, utterly without drama, did something to the atmosphere in that garage. Marcus felt it. He saw it move across the faces of the others too, that particular shift that happens when someone does something genuinely good in front of you and doesn't wait around to be thanked for it. The conversations got quieter. More real. The kind of talking that happens late at night when guards come down and people stop performing and start actually speaking. The silver-haired woman, her name was Diane, she was riding from Tennessee to visit a daughter she hadn't seen in 2 years, started asking Earl questions. Gentle ones. How long had he had the shop? Whether he'd always been in this town. Whether business was good. Earl answered everything honestly, which was its own kind of courage, because the honest answers weren't easy ones. Business hadn't been good for a long time. The interstate bypass had changed traffic patterns 8 years ago. The younger people in town took their cars to the dealership in the city, 40 minutes away, where everything was computerized and efficient and came with a warranty card. Earl understood it. He didn't say it with bitterness, he said it the way a man describes weather, as something that happened and continued to happen and wasn't personal. His overhead was low because he owned the building outright, had paid it off in 1999, the best day of his professional life. But property taxes had climbed. Parts costs had climbed. And somewhere in the last few years the numbers had stopped working the way numbers need to work. The bank, he said, was taking the property in 30 days. He said it the same way he'd said everything else all night. Quietly. Without performance. He was wiping down a socket wrench when he said it, and he kept wiping it after he said it, and he put it back on the pegboard in its exact spot, and he moved on. Nobody in that garage said anything for a moment. Marcus looked at his coffee cup. He looked at the walls, the pegboard tools, the vintage calendar, the transistor radio, the handmade sign above the bay door that read quality work, fair price, no excuses in painted letters that had been touched up so many times you could see 4 different shades of black in the brushstrokes. He looked at Earl's back, at the men moving to the next bike, still working, still helping, still giving something to people who were essentially strangers to him on what was, by any measure, one of the harder nights of his life. Marcus stood up and walked outside. The rain was still falling, lighter now, the storm beginning its slow withdrawal. He stood on the gravel in the dark, phone in his hand, and he looked at the signal bars. 1 bar. Barely. The kind of signal that drops calls and refuses to load pages and gives you just enough hope to be frustrating. He tried anyway. He opened the platform, typed fast, uploaded 1 photograph. He'd taken it an hour earlier without thinking much about it, just Earl crouching beside a bike in the warm light of the garage, the kind of image that doesn't need a filter or a caption to tell you everything about a person, and he wrote 4 sentences. He wrote about the storm. He wrote about the garage. He wrote about a 72-year-old man who opened his doors at 11 at night to 8 people he'd never met and fixed their bikes and made them coffee and hadn't asked for a single thing in return. He wrote that the bank was taking this man's shop in 30 days and that felt wrong to him in a way he didn't have a more sophisticated word for. He hit post and went back inside. He didn't say anything about it. He poured more coffee and sat back down and listened to Diane tell a story about the first time she'd ridden a motorcycle, and Earl laughed at the right moment, a real laugh, the kind that starts in the chest, and the night continued. Around 2 in the morning, someone pulled out a harmonica. Marcus never caught the man's name, the quiet one, the one who hadn't said much all night, but he played it well, old songs, the kind that sound like they were written for exactly this kind of night, and the garage held the music the way old buildings hold sound, with warmth and without echo. Earl sat down for the first time all night. He took the chair someone offered him, accepted a refilled cup, and leaned back with his hands wrapped around it and his eyes somewhere between the present and a long way away. Marcus thought about asking what he was thinking. He decided not to. Some expressions belong to the person having them. By 3:30, the rain had stopped. By 4, the riders were gearing up, jackets re-zipped, gloves back on, helmets lifted from the workbench where they'd been lined up like a small congregation. Each of them stopped in front of Earl. Each of them tried to give him something: money, a card. A handshake held a few seconds longer than handshakes usually last. Earl accepted the handshakes. He declined everything else with the same single headshake he'd been using all night, patient and absolute. Diane hugged him. He looked briefly surprised, then returned it. Marcus shook his hand last. Earl's grip was what Marcus expected: firm, dry, unhurried, the hand of a man who has used his hands for serious work his entire life. "Thank you," Marcus said. Earl nodded once. "Road's clear now. Y'all be safe." They rode out into the dark, single file, headlights cutting through the wet air, and Marcus didn't look back because riders don't look back, and also because he wasn't sure what his face was doing. His phone buzzed 6 miles down the road where the signal returned fully. Then it buzzed again. And again. And then it was buzzing continuously, a sustained vibration against his jacket pocket, and he pulled off at the first wide shoulder he found and stopped and looked at the screen. The Post had 40,000 shares. It had been live for less than 3 hours. He scrolled through the comments with his thumb, standing on the shoulder of the highway in the dark, and what he saw there was not what the internet usually looks like. No arguing. No cynicism. No one making it about something else. Just people, thousands of them, then tens of thousands, saying some version of the same thing. This man deserves everything. How do we help? Someone help him. I'm sending something right now. Where do we send it? By noon that same day, strangers were sending money from 6 countries. By mid-afternoon, a biker who happened to be a real estate attorney 2 states over had made 3 phone calls and stopped the foreclosure process. Not delayed it. Stopped it. By evening, cars were pulling into Earl's gravel lot, people Marcus had never met, who had never met Earl, who had simply seen a photograph of an old man crouching beside a motorcycle in warm light and understood immediately, the way people sometimes do, that here was someone worth showing up for. Earl stood in the bay door of his garage, still his, with a coffee cup in one hand and the specific expression of a man who has lived long enough to stop being surprised by hardship and has not yet recalibrated for this. He had opened his doors in a storm because 8 people needed somewhere to be. He had fixed bikes because they needed fixing. He had made coffee because it was cold. He had asked for nothing, expected nothing, performed nothing. And the world, which does not always get it right, which misses more than it catches, which lets too many Earls disappear too quietly into circumstance and time, the world, this one time, on this particular morning after a particular storm, looked up and saw him standing there. And it did not look away.